British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has spoken of the need for post-Brexit Britain to cooperate with non-traditional partners, particularly countries in Asia, Latin America and Africa. The remarks were contained in Cleverly's first major speech on the future of the UK foreign policy. He said Britain will demonstrate its long-term commitment to the Indo-Pacific, which includes joining the Trans-Pacific Free Trade Agreement. He spoke about finalising a trade agreement and deepening bilateral cooperation with India, the new president of the G20. Mr. Cleverly also affirmed backing for Indonesia's transition to renewable energy, saying that the UK stands ready to support delivery of the partnership. For more, Giles Gibson joins us live now. He's in London. Giles, what is James Cleverly's new vision of the United Kingdom's foreign policy for Asia?
Well, Dawn, James Cleverly started off his speech by praising UK foreign policy in the past and its partners in the West for setting up things like the United Nations, as well as the World Trade Organization and the World Bank. But he did then shift gears and really acknowledge that the world has changed a huge amount since those institutions were first set up. He said the world's geopolitical center of gravity is moving towards the south and the east. And he also acknowledged that a much greater share of the global economy is now being produced, in countries in Asia and Africa and Latin America, and therefore the UK needs to reach out beyond its existing partnerships that it's built up over the decades. As you mentioned, he did have a few specific countries that he wanted to talk about. He talked about India and efforts to secure a free trade agreement with that country in the wake of the UK leaving the European Union. He also talked about helping Indonesia as well with its green energy transition. But in a way, this speech was long on a lot of rhetoric. It had a lot of sort of 30,000-foot imagery. It had a lot of sort of big picture analysis. It didn't really have much detail in terms of the exact countries in those regions that the UK is going to be reaching out to and trying to build up partnerships with.
And he's faced some criticism as well, hasn't he, Giles? Accusations of backing down on human rights in favour of so-called pragmatic partnerships with influential countries. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the critics of this vision of James Cleverly will say that basically the way that the UK is going to make some of these new partnerships, is going to embrace some of these new countries, it's perhaps lowering the bar in terms of what it expects in terms of commitments to human rights. I mean, we saw James Cleverly giving a series of interviews over the weekend, and he was asked specifically about a couple of countries. He was asked about Saudi Arabia, and he said that they were an incredibly important partner despite their use of the death penalty, talking about how the UK and Saudi Arabia can work together on things like trade and counter-terrorism. He was also asked about China, and he said that some of their behaviour is, in his words, unacceptable, raising, for example, the treatment of the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang. But he also said the other side of that coin is that China can also be an important partner for good in terms of climate change. Really, what we saw from James Cleverly over the last couple of hours in this speech was his vision for UK foreign policy in the next 15, 20, 25 years. But of course, as we've seen over the last year or so, events on the ground, things like the invasion of Ukraine, as well as the turmoil that we've seen in British politics, can make it pretty difficult to focus on the long term when you've got so much chaos going on in the short term.
Thank you, Giles. Giles Gibson there, reporting live from London.